Well, hello there, and welcome to another Infinite Inning Reissue episode number 22 in the series, I believe. I am, as ever, Stephen Goldman, your host for both these flashback episodes and for the fresh fish, the hot pancakes that come your way at the end of each week. I hope that, as always, this episode finds you well. I am very glad to be here with you. It's very funny because I'm late as usual, and when you get to the flashback part of the episode, you will see that I began 7 years ago by talking about procrastination, and it's really not that. I do think this last week or month, actually, the postseason has been taking up an excessive amount of my time, just because I am less likely to tear myself away from a ballgame that has a direct championship impact than if it were just a weekday game between the Pirates and the Rockies. We'll get back to that Pirates-Rockies idea in a second. As I come to you today, it's Thursday, the day after Game 5 of the World Series, won by the Toronto Blue Jays, and I am here in the very rainy Northeast, just listening to the water come down. I've talked openly here on the show and other places about my battles with depression, which at times have been severe. I'm in a better place right now, knock wood. I'm happy to report that. And unlike a lot of people who have seasonally affected depression or are brought down by this kind of weather, I'm not negatively affected by dark, wet days. I enjoy the ambiance of a rainy day. There's a peanut strip from somewhere in the middle of the run, and it just wasn't time effective for me to figure out the date, so I apologize, in which Snoopy is lying on his doghouse, as always, being rained on, and he thinks, this is the sort of dreary fall rain that makes you want to sit inside all day and stare out the window and drink tea and play sad songs on the stereo. And the last of the 4 panels shows Snoopy doing exactly that, as Charlie Brown looks on with a quizzical expression on his face. That is me exactly, except I'm not brought down by it. I'm lifted by it for some perverse reason. I should get a print of that one and hang it somewhere. I have one Peanuts reprint up directly across from my desk. I can see it as I'm speaking to you. I may have mentioned this before. Snoopy is doing his World War I fighter pilot bit. He is describing the First World War in exquisite detail, and the strip ends with him looking at camera and saying, "Have you ever in your life seen such thorough research?" And that seemed very appropriate for what I do here. It was one of many Peanut strips in which I felt seen, and I thank goodness that Charles Schulz made that 50-year work of art so it could read me as I was reading it. I hope it's okay then if, consistent with the spirit of a very wet day in which one just sits by the window, seeing what one can see and thinking what one can think, that we ramble a bit. I'm a bit burned out. As much as I love baseball, that 18-inning game did me in. Don't misunderstand. I loved every minute of it. But coming back the next 2 days felt anticlimactic and a little burdensome. Even though games 4 and 5 only went to regulation 9, we've still seen an average of 12 innings a night for the last 3 nights. Even something or someone you love can overstay its or their welcome in select periods of high stress. As Benjamin Franklin once wrote, both fish and house guests start to stink after 3 days. And thus does welcome friend transit to unwelcome imposition. There's only one downside to my love of rainy days. I hate rainouts. That's not an issue now, with Toronto playing in a domed ballpark and the Dodgers, who we're done with in terms of home games for the year, playing in a climate in which rainouts are exceedingly rare. But during the regular season, I'm for some reason excessively troubled by those games that were supposed to be played on Thursday, April 23rd, but are rescheduled to be made up as part of a split bill doubleheader on August 12th. That seems like too long to wait for me. And I particularly hate those rainouts, which result in a game being made up if necessary. To me, they're all necessary. Well, maybe not Pirates Rockies. How did that series go this year? Do you want to guess? My initial guess was Pirates 5 games, Rockies 1. I was off by 1. The Pirates won 4 of the 6, and that's not surprising because the Pirates try to subsist at a level just above miserable, like some invertebrate species that lies on the bottom of the ocean and consumes the detritus that snows down on them from above. Yes, I think I just described the Pittsburgh sea cucumbers. It's a delicacy in some places. It really, really is. It's just an alimentary tract in a sausage casing, but who am I to judge anyone? Anyway, unlike the Pirates, the Rockies are the detritus, and I know that sounds terribly mean, and I feel bad about it. In fact, I would like to work for the Rockies. I wrote something about that, somewhat facetiously, at Baseball Prospectus earlier this year. I have limited math skills and no scouting skills to speak of. Being partially blind, I have less to offer in an observational way than the average bear. I mean a literal bear. Set that bear up behind home plate with a radar gun and a bowl of peanut butter, and he'll do better than I do. What was that he just swung at? Change up? Thank you. Unlike the bear, though, I do know my baseball history. I do know how winning teams have been constructed, and I know that the Rockies have consistently ignored that history. Now, maybe that's not a job. Maybe it's a single consulting session to scream unpaid percentage at them in a way they've already heard a million times. But I'm still willing to try. Not for my sake, but for theirs. Just buy me a plane ticket and lunch. It's fine. I don't need to profit by it. I just want to have the conversation with you, okay? The real shocker to me of the Pirates going 4-2 against the Rockies was that one of the two was a Paul Skeens start. Paul Skeens, 1.97 ERA in 187 and 2/3 innings, 216 strikeouts, was roughed up by them. On August 24th, he pitched against them in Pittsburgh and held them to 3 hits, no walks, no runs over 7 innings. The Pirates, who had an almost historically bad offense this year, scored 4 runs and Bob's your uncle. The fans went home happy. I say almost historically bad because the Rockies were worse. Nevertheless, 3 weeks earlier at Colorado, the Rockies got to Skeens. He had pitched a shutout through 5. The Pirates were up 4-0 on Liover Peguero's 3-homer game. Somehow, and can you blame me, I had completely forgotten that Liover Peguero had a 3-homer game this year. He only hit 4 on the season while averaging 200, this in 88 plate appearances. Maybe I never knew. I study every day, I really do, but that's one that didn't stick with me. Suddenly, in the 6th, Skeens couldn't get an out, allowed 4 consecutive hits, including a 3-run homer to Jordan Beck, and was lifted for Brandon Ashcraft, who crashed the Ashcraft. He allowed an inherited runner to score, then added a bunch of runs of his own. It was like a Dodgers bullpen cameo. Skeens in 2025, and he may well yet, or has already, and we just don't know, won the NL Cy Young Award, had 20 quality starts in 32 chances. As you may remember, a quality start is 6 innings or more, 3 runs or less. I was a little surprised by the percentage being that low until I checked and was reminded that the Pirates many times lifted him after 5 innings, even if he was doing very well. As I said, you need 6 to get that quality stamp of approval. In 4 of those starts, he allowed no runs at all. Thus, his start at the Rockies was one of his few true clunkers, and he had help from the bullpen and a Pirates coaching staff that sent him out for the 6th, even though he was gassed. I know that last one isn't fair, and I don't really mean it. So if you had Thrash Paul Skeens on your Rockies bingo card for this year, you, blue-haired sir or madam, are a winner. Can we return to Liover Peguero for a second? Was he the unlikeliest player ever to hit 3 home runs in a game? Perhaps he had some coffee that morning. Vibrant Afuera coffee. Yes, it vibrates. I missed the trill on the R there. Afuera. And if you go to afuera.com and use the coupon code Infinite Inning, you will get a 15% discount. The best that they offer on their ethically sourced coffee from the free nation of El Salvador. If you encounter the ghost of Ronald Reagan, take my advice, don't mention it, but anybody else, you can say, hey, this is rainforest-friendly Java. Is it the Chase and Sanborn Coffee Hour starring Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy with special guest W.C. Fields? You could look it up, folks. Nope, it's all online nowadays at afueracoffee.com. Peguero, of course, is from the Dominican Republic, and I don't know what he drinks in the mornings, or at night, or at any time, really. There have been a lot of 3-homer games in baseball history. We've been doing this for a very long time, after all, playing thousands of games a season. According to Baseball Reference, 487 players have hit 3 homers in a game, some of them multiple times. Of those 487 players, 287 of them did it since 1995, or I should say after 1995. At that point, the The ball started getting bouncier and the players started getting juicier. Perhaps the players are less juicy than they used to be, but the ball is still as resilient as ever, or at least historically more resilient than it was previously, even if in different years it's dulled down or hyped up. Caffeinated, you might say. Don't worry, I'm not going back to that. But think of it this way, from the introduction of the lively ball in 1920 until the Selig canceled World Series, 200 players did it. Again, some of them multiple times, but still, 200 players in 75 years. Since then, 287 players have done it in 30 years. And if you go down the list, you get a ton of people you would expect, Hall of Famers or players who were noted for their power, so you're not surprised. Johnny Mize, Hall of Famer, did it 6 times. Dave Kingman did it 5. Joe Carter did it 5 times. Not a Hall of Famer. Again, a pretty strong hitter, though. Lou Gehrig, 4. 2 Hall of Famers, 2 players who aren't in and shouldn't be, but it was well within the realm of possibility that they would have days like that. When I was a kid, we used to wonder how the Hall of Fame voters would have handled things if Kingman, then still active, reached 500 home runs. Collusion and a low on-base percentage stopped him. I still wonder. Larry Parrish did it 3 times, which surprises me a little, but he also hit 256 home runs in his career, and if he hadn't started his career in Montreal, he probably would have hit 10 or 15% more home runs. In his most extreme season there, 1978, he hit 282, 330, 500 with 11 home runs on the road, 272, 313 with a .412 slugging percentage with only 4 home runs at home. Darnell Coles did it twice. That one surprised me. By odd coincidence, I believe he was fired just today as Nationals hitting coach. So sorry, Darnell. He was such a vexing player. He was the 6th overall pick in the 1980 draft, and that's not as much of a miss as it sounds like, because none of the first rounders that year turned into stars, except for the very first, the tippy top, the first overall pick, Darryl Strawberry, and his career was pretty vexing as well. Coles hit pretty well in the minors, but he was drafted as a shortstop and moved to third base, but he couldn't field well enough for either of those positions, and except for a couple of seasons, didn't hit well enough to make up for his lack of fielding ability. He first came to my attention in a big way. I was amazed and astounded during his 48-game trial with the 1984 Mariners, when he hit 161 with a .259 on-base percentage and a .196 slugging percentage, while also fielding .918 at third. His most notable offensive season came in 1986 after the Tigers traded their 1982 first-round pick, the reliever Rich Monteleone, to the Mariners to get him. Monteleone was selected 15 picks after Dwight Gooden, falling between Franklin Stubbs and Todd Worrell. The Tigers were having a very hard time finding a regular third baseman back then. They had signed Darrell Evans for the 1984 season, and although he hit pretty well for them, including having a 40 home run season at one point, he was really past the age that he was going to play third base well, and they had traded Howard Johnson. Sparky Anderson did not believe in Howard Johnson, and so Coles was their latest try. And in 86, he played every day, mostly at third. He hit 273 with a .333 on base and a .453 slugging percentage with 20 home runs. Evans also hit 20 playing first base, as did Lou Whitaker and Alan Trammell as the double play combination, and so the Tigers became just the second team after the 1940 Red Sox to have the entire infield put up matching power numbers. The Red Sox did it first with Jimmy Fox, Bobby Doerr, Joe Cronin, and Jim Tabor. It's now happened more than 10 times, all of them after 1995. If you count catcher Lance Parrish as an infielder, then the Tigers were the first team to have the entire infield hit at least 20 home runs. That, too, has now been duplicated 3 times by the 1996 Orioles, 2005 Rangers, and 2019 Twins. Here's how random all of this is. The first name that truly surprises me was Butch Henlon. I'm sure there were many more who would be unexpected, but his name happened to come up first, and we're not going to be here long enough to go through 500 names. He was a part-time catcher, mostly in the 1920s, playing with the Giants, Phillies, Dodgers, and White Sox, and he hit all of 40 home runs in a 740-game career. My first clue should have been Phillies, because yes, Henlon did it in the phone booth-sized Baker Bowl. Hey, tell your children what a phone booth was. Or if they happen to hear me refer to the Sanborn and Chase coffee hour, tell them what radio was as well. Henlon had come up with the Giants, but at midseason 1921, the Phillies had picked him up along with outfielder Kurt Walker and the $30,000 they needed to be able to afford underwear without holes in them in return for the disgruntled outfielder Irish Musial. Actually, they were more disgruntled with Irish, or Emil, than he was with them, and in fact, they got in trouble for slagging him as he was going out the door. But it was a good trade for both sides. On September 15th, 1922, the Phillies hosted the Cardinals in what turned out to be a wild 10-9 home team victory. Rogers Hornsby hit 2 homers off of Jimmy Ring for the visitors, while Henlon hit his off of Bill Schertle, a 20-game winner in the future. Spittin' Bill Doak, also a 20-game winner, while the third came off of Lester Elwood Epsell, a 4-game winner with a career .656 ERA. The Philadelphia Inquirer game story the next day described it this way: Hefty Butch, the Demon Kid catcher, shooed so many balls out of the lot that the umpire contracted a sore arm reaching for additional spheres. In the fourth, the peppery catcher lifted the old apple into the left field bleachers for number 1. In the seventh, Henlon duplicated the drive and followed with the one which tied things up in the final. Result 3 homers, which equals the work of Ken Williams this season. Williams and Henlon are the only 2 to lose 3 pills this season, but many have done it in the past. Ken Williams, of course, was the St. Louis Browns outfielder who was in the process of having the first 30-30 season in Major League history. Alongside the game story was a separate article that it was probably just a coincidence that it ran that way, but it seemed like a comment. The headline, "Home run hitting in major leagues is becoming farce." I just want to point out, maybe this seems obvious, that it's not surprising that whereas 2 of Henlon's homers came off of pretty decent pitchers, just having off days, that the third came off of Epsell, because who gives up the most home runs? Not Sandy Koufax, not Craig Maddox. If they had given up a lot of home runs, they wouldn't have been who they were. No, it's pitchers like Epsell who allow the Ruths and Gehrigs and Judges and Otanis to fill up the record books with big shots. Today's reissue goes back to episode 93 for a discussion of 2 players who had the nickname Fat hung on them. This was kind of inspired by listening to all the encomiums placed on Alejandro Kirk by broadcasters during the postseason. Kirk is a good player, and he's having a very good postseason, but he's not Yogi Berra, and that said, he's Yogi Berra's size. Yogi was 5'7", Kirk is 5'8", and I wouldn't say he's fat, he's just kind of oval. And that was all the excuse I needed to revive this particular show and that particular slander, and it was a slander. You will note that when you get into the reissue section of the show, which is just moments away now, that I left in the name of the guest. I've usually been taking those out, even though we're not hearing that segment today, and that's because it was Marty Appel. He had a biography of Casey Stengel out. That got me talking about the old professor, and I am loath to delete any Casey talk at all. As Buddy Holly sang, well, all right, that's all for me for this reissue episode. It's also all from Butch Henlon in terms of 3-homer games. You will hear from me periodically as I paper over the odd thing that I have to patch, old advertising breaks that no longer fall in the right place, and I will be back at the end to say, fare thee well, at least until tomorrow, when again I'll be back with a brand new episode. So stand by, and on the other side, we'll return to old episode 47. Yeehaw. Sometimes in life, we struggle to bring ourselves to do the very things that we most need to do. We can be very self-critical about this. We can call it procrastination. We can call it a lack of willpower or a lack of self-discipline. I don't know if those things are useful. I know I go through periods like that where there are things I need to do and at least on some level want to do, but it's very hard for me to get myself to do them, or it might require me a kind of ramping up period of hours, wasted hours, before I really get moving. And sometimes those are useful hours because I know creatively my thoughts are crystallizing in that time, and although it feels like I'm putting things off, it's that I really don't know what to do. But there are other times I can't claim anything so lofty, and I just have trouble getting started. We tell ourselves that we have infinite time to do the things that we want to do. My maternal grandfather died almost a quarter of a century ago now, and shortly thereafter I went to my grandmother's house to help her clean up some of his effects. And their garage was his work area. He had a couple of them. He was an engineer and he was very handy fixing things, so he had a long list of appliances and items of furniture and so on that he was going to repair or, for all I know, combine into something completely new. It was not beyond him to imagine that he might patch a torn lawn chair and attach an engine to it and go rocketing off down the street or into the sky. And I have little doubt he could have achieved at least some of that if life or some other stuff, I guess, hadn't kept getting in the way. Maybe sometimes when I visited, I got in the way. But now the opportunity had irrevocably passed, and it was my job to take all these half-finished projects and bring them out to the curb. And as I showed my grandmother one half-finished project or another, she remarked, not without some humor, "That man thought he was going to live forever." And that struck me like lightning. I was in my early 20s at the time. And whereas I had always had a dread of mortality, I guess I had never framed it in terms of piling up such a backlog of goals that one could never reach the bottom of the stack. Once you've had that thought, it puts a kind of pressure on you, especially if you're me and you keep adding new books. I want to learn so many things. I want to learn everything. But when am I going to find the time to read that? I say to myself, well, that subject is important. I'll make time. And sometimes I do, but not always. And, of course, making time means that something else gets pushed to the bottom of the pile that seemed just as important the day before. And it's also problematic to think about things in this way because you can't drive yourself all the time. You can't be all work and no play all the time. And so when you're tired, when you don't feel like tasking your brain, when you just want to unwind a little bit, the question is, are you going to finally get around to reading Titus Andronicus, or are you going to watch that Seinfeld repeat for the 5th time? Once you've committed, it's an irrevocable decision. You may steal the time back from some other thing down the road, but that time is not restored to you. It's just spent. Strangely, I was thinking about that this week in relationship to something you've no doubt heard about if you follow the game, the Atlanta Braves' decision to demote Ronald Acuna, one of the top prospects in baseball, in what was a transparent bid to mess around with his service time so that they could save an extra year on arbitration or free agency, as if they couldn't afford it anyway. Occasional guest of this show, Craig Calcaterra, has done a great job railing against this kind of chicanery. And David Roth, my regular co-host, had a terrific piece on it as well at Deadspin, which manages to connect the decision to the whole malaise that afflicts our society in what I call the age of you'll take what we give you and like it. But it occurred to me that whether you are living for George R.R. Martin to finish the Game of Thrones series, don't hear a lot about that lately, maybe people have moved on, or you want to see the conclusion of the current Star Wars trilogy, or you just want to see Acuna play in the major leagues, we're all just a slip and fall in the bathtub away from missing out altogether, and that every day that Acuna is down, the odds of that happening grow larger. I realize this is true of everything all the time, but it brought it home to me. And when I start thinking of issues like that, I not only have the same fears that everyone else has, but I think again of what my grandmother said, that man thought he would live forever, and of all the things that are undone that I want to do. And then, with that in mind, I go ahead and I do nothing, or often do nothing. And it only provides so much succor to say, like Popeye the Sailor, I am what I am and that's all that I am, and just accept one's own weakness. There was an outfielder on the Tigers in the 1920s and 30s. His name was Bob Fothergill. given the very light lower boundary of 1,000 plate appearances. I know you know that the all-time leader in batting average for the Tigers was Ty Cobb. He hit .368 during his stay there. Number 2 was Harry Howlman, who won 3 or 4 batting titles and hit .400 one year. He hit .342. But number 3 was Bob Fothergill. He hit .337 in 2,693 plate appearances. Despite his obvious hitting ability, the name Bob Fothergill may not ring a bell because he's more commonly listed under the name Fats Fothergill. I'm not going to call him that because he didn't like to be called that. To him, he was Bob. He was also, to him and everybody else, 5'10" and officially 230 pounds. That, I promise you, is not true. You can look at any picture. He was, as Captain Beefheart once said repeatedly on Trout Mask Replica, large and bulbous. To my eye, he was proportioned a bit like CC Sabathia, just at a reduced scale because he was almost a foot shorter. But whatever his dimensions, the man could hit. In his best season of 1927, he hit .359 in 143 games, hit 38 doubles, 9 triples, 9 home runs, drove in 114 runs. I hate having to recite stats. They are the death of entertaining listening, but sometimes there's no other way to describe a player. The thing is, he didn't have much of a career. You haven't heard of him, even though he was a .325 lifetime hitter overall, because he had a hard time getting into the lineup and staying in the lineup. Part of that was a problem of timing, an aspect of his career that was not at all his fault. When he first came up, the Tigers' outfield was packed, and it mostly stayed packed. In his first seasons, they still had Cobb and Howlman, who we've already established were among the best hitters for average of all time. And the third outfielder was Bobby Veach, who wasn't quite of that quality. He was a .310 career hitter, but was pretty clearly a Hall of Very Good kind of guy who, at his best, combined high averages with a lot of extra base hits. And once he was gone, they moved in Heine Manush, another future Hall of Famer who hit .330 for his career. And then they came up with John Stone, another .310 career hitter. And then G. Walker, who had speed and defense and at his best in the mid-30s was a .320 guy every year. And as good a hitter as Fothergill was, a crowded outfield was more of a problem for him than it would have been for another player because his weight pretty much limited him to left field. You can't have a 5'10", 250 or 260 pound guy in center field, and you really can't have him in right field either because every hit into the corner is going to be a triple. The last thing I want to do is echo all the people who mocked Bob for his weight during his life, but even the newspapers describe him as waddling. Waddling is not conducive to good outfield defense. He took endless grief for this, both professionally and at the place where the professional intersects with the personal. There are many stories of players trying to get Fothergill's goat by mocking his weight on the field. There is one that Leo DeRocher told over and over again, and Leo lied about a lot of things, but you can trace the game that he's talking about to the newspapers and the box scores, and although the incident isn't confirmed exactly by them, the contours are close enough that it seems like it's real, that in a Yankees-Tigers game that was about to be called after 7 for darkness, the Tigers were batting with runners on. Fothergill was either going to drive in the winning run or be the last batter. And in order to shake him up, Leo DeRocher came running in from second base yelling, "Time, time, the Tigers are batting out of order." And everybody said, "What are you talking about? That's Fothergill. He's been batting third all day, and he's batting third now." And Leo said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought they had sent 2 men up to the plate at once." Fat joke. Supposedly, Fothergill was so unnerved by this that he struck out, which he very rarely did, and then tried to cream Leo with the bat, but of course Leo was too fast for him. Today we know that the causes of obesity come in many flavors. There's lifestyle, diet, exercise, even genetics. But none of that is to say that Fothergill bore no responsibility for his conditioning. He was what they used to call a trencherman. He liked to eat. He liked to drink a lot of beer. And yet, he knew the effect that those things were having on his career. Every spring, they made a show of putting him in rubber suits and having him run extra laps. This was a way of making fun of him, too, in addition to trying to get him into shape. And yet, he did not, or could not, or would not change. As a result, he couldn't compete with all those other guys that I named. As good a hitter as he was, he would sit. And there is only one season in his whole career, which lasted 12 years, where he played anything like a full campaign. And as happens to all limited players, as soon as the Tigers had other options, and they had the firstest, barest hint that he might be slipping off of that 350, 360 batting average peak, he was gone. They didn't even bother to trade him. They just put him on waivers. And even then, you might say, well, he was 35. A lot of ball players go home at 35. That's a good run. And I suppose that's true, but you can't help the feeling that there should have been more. Not necessarily later, not at 35, that's hard for the best of players, but earlier, when he could have helped himself, when he could have fought through that crowded outfield by giving the Tigers another image for himself beyond blimp-like. And that was his teammate's description, not mine. But I think that Bob, like so many of us, thought there's time to do it tomorrow. There's one more beer and one more burger looking very attractive today. And there's dieting and jogging and the things that I gotta do, whatever they are, those will wait because there's time. And then there's this. He stayed in Detroit after his retirement, went to work for the Ford Motor Company, but the weight was still a problem. He must have been hypertensive as hell. There was one stroke that he survived, but a second one hit him on March 20th, 1938, not quite 5 years after his career had ended. That was the end of Bob Fothergill. He was 40 years old. Harry Howman was one of his close friends on the team, and Howman used to kid him a lot. Bob was such a friendly, popular guy. He was actually known as the People's Choice in Detroit for many years. And after games, any fan could go up to him in a hotel lobby. There used to be a whole art of lobby sitting for ball players. And Bob would show off his swing and talk about what a great hitter he was. And Howman would kid him that he got most of his hits in hotel lobbies. I don't know if Howman also pointed out that he did much of his eating in hotel restaurants, or that he did far too much of his playing on the bench. Again, some of us figure we'll live forever, and whether it's taking off weight or getting that lawn chair hitched to that rocket engine, we can always get to it tomorrow. There's always something more compelling, more interesting, more important. And hell, we're only human, right? Just ask Bob Fothergill. He's right over there, on the periphery of your vision, just out of view, a pale and hungry ghost, pointing a finger that bulges like a sausage casing and saying, "Work now, for the night comes when no man can work." I'm Stephen Goldman, and this is the Infinite Inning Baseball Podcast. Well, hello there.
It is later than you think.
And so your time has come. You had been a good person, and so you arrive in due time before the pearly gates. The gatekeeper wears a green eye shade, and he checks over your paperwork with care. Well, that was very good. Yes, that was a good moment. Yes, charity. Yes, kindness. Yes, gave hope to others. Yes, all very positive. You can come in, but, he says, handing you a sheaf of blank papers, there are a few things we need you to do first. Specifically, we need a little more content around here. It is heaven, after all, but people still need to be entertained, don't they? They need things to read. And so, you were a writer in life, and we'd like to ask you, if it's not too much, to just write 7 or 8 or 10 stories before you come in, so that
the people who are already inside can be uplifted by them just as you uplifted people down below. Well, sure, you say, but where am I supposed to stay during the time that I'm working on these? These are going to take some time. Well, right out here on this cloud, it's very comfortable. Do people get hungry up here? Yes, they do. Well, what am I supposed to eat? Well, there's kind of a coffee bar, a Starbucks kind of thing, just over on the next cloud. You can go there. Do they charge money? Yes, I'm afraid they do. Well, this gown sort of thing that you have me in, it doesn't seem to have any pockets. My wallet seems to be back in my other life. So how do I pay for them? Are you going to compensate me for writing these stories? Are you going to give me money? Money? This is heaven. We're a sort of a utopian commune. We have no concept of money. No, I'm afraid you're on your own for that. But how am I supposed to survive? Well, that's really not our responsibility. We're giving you an opportunity here, you see, an exposure to the great audience that we have behind the gates. It's a very large and select audience, and if you do well with them, why, the sky's the limit for you, my boy. Pardon the pun. Write the stories, and if you can just hang on for 7 or 8 or 9,000 years, we'll reevaluate your case and perhaps admit you then. You can be on staff. Staff doesn't need to eat. And you realize that John Milton, who is conspicuously absent here on the cloud, was correct. 'Tis better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, and better to write nothing at all than to write for free, and better than both is to listen to episode 47. The Wobblies used to have a song, "You'll get pie in the sky when you die," but that was pure supposition. Welcome back to the show. Today I am joined by Marty Appel, author of many books, most recently Casey Stengel, Baseball's Greatest Character, which is the latest of many biographies of the old professor, among them my own Forging Genius. But whereas Forging Genius was focused on Casey's pre-Yankees managerial career, Marty's book takes in the whole Megillah. And I am pleased to note that my own book appears in the bibliography, so some element of my own contribution is carried on in this one, and that's a good feeling. As I allude to in our discussion, or at least I think I do, I'll explain that in a minute, there are many biographical subjects who recur over and over again. Statistically, I think Abraham Lincoln has had more written about him than any human being to walk the earth other than Jesus Christ. Here in our country, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Franklin Roosevelt, there are a whole lot of Richard Nixon books. And some of them have something new to offer, and some of them are just recapitulations. And so, as a reader, you have to be discerning. But there are good reasons to go back to them, and the reasons vary depending on who you're talking about. But each story has something valuable to teach us that is worth restating every once in a while so a new generation can get hold of it. Not all of us haunt the used bookstores or the libraries or even the new bookstores, and these things just need to get recirculated in the culture so that they get some coverage, some discussion. With Casey, there are two aspects of it. One is, as Marty's subtitle suggests, he was a great character. The bigger part, I think, was his indefatigability, which is to say that he got knocked back a number of times because of the circumstances that he got to manage in. And I often wonder, when you have a manager who takes over a horrible team, and that team goes 60 and 102 and he gets canned, that manager may never get another chance, and yet it's not all on him. Let me use Alan Trammell as an example. In 2003, Alan Trammell's Detroit Tigers, his first year as a major league manager, went 43 and 119. They were one of the worst teams of all time. Casey could not have saved that team. Connie Mack could not have, Joe McCarthy could not have, Tony La Russa, Earl Weaver, any manager in the Hall of Fame you care to name would not have improved that team. And more than that, even in this modern age with free agency and other ways of jump-starting a club, that is not the kind of team that's going to fix itself very quickly. And so Trammell got 2 more years and he lost 90 games both times. Other than an interim stint in Arizona, he has had no other opportunity to manage. And maybe he hasn't wanted it. Maybe he's happier being a coach. Maybe if you go 43 and 119, you have PTSD. I don't really know. I haven't asked him. I'd like to. But the bigger point is, obviously, had he gone 119 and 43 instead, he'd likely still be working. I don't know whether he would be a good manager in that case. I don't know if he was a bad one. I don't know if he was part of the problem with the Detroit Tigers. I just know he was irrelevant. Casey, when he was about the age that Trammell started managing, got a Brooklyn Dodgers team that was broke, that the bank had cut off, that the National League had to intervene to restructure, and had some good players, had some interesting players. It was not a 43 and 119 team. It was a team that, if everything broke right, might have had a 500 season somewhere, but there was no helping it. And then from there, he went to the Boston Braves, who were actually worse off. And as we'll discuss in the interview, Casey had his own sources of money by that point, and at times he was advancing the Braves money out of his pocket to keep the franchise afloat. That's how bad they were. But not everybody knew that, and I do think that by the time he got done with the Braves, he was phoning it in a little bit because, let's face it, if you're paying to keep your team going, as a manager, it's probably hard to keep your interest up. And so, like Alan Trammell, there was every reason that he not be given another shot, because people just take the record at face value and say, why bother? And I wonder how many Casey Stengels we might have been deprived of in that way. The interview with Marty is a little bit shorter than the typical interview I do here, in part because there were some technical problems at the beginning, and I actually cut off his first answer, which was really just, hey, how you doing? Glad to be here. And then because he just didn't have time to do the typical hour that I do, and that's fine. So I'll let you off the hook a bit early this week. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoy this discussion about this important figure in American history, not just baseball history. He really is an example of resiliency and all the ways that a person can bounce back from adversity and keep believing in themselves and try again. Casey once summed himself up this way: don't give up. Tomorrow is just another day, and that's myself. Sure, it's in Stengelese, but it's something we can all understand and aspire to. Today might not have gone my way, but I'm the man who is tomorrow. Tomorrow belongs to me. Before I roll Marty in, a few words about another player who happened to go by the name Fat. I didn't intend that to be a theme today, just a coincidence that I was attracted to two stories about players with that nickname. This one is a pitcher, a knuckleballer, Fat Freddie Fitzsimmons. In fairness to all involved, I should say that Fat Freddie was more stocky Freddie Fitzsimmons, especially compared to Bob Fothergill, who was as wide as he was high.
You know, there's a World War II song with that theme. It's called Mr. 5x5, and as the kids say, it slaps. Do they say that? I've never heard my kids say it. Maybe you'll say it about our next discussion, which will commence right after this brief intermission.
Freddie Fitzsimmons was a really good pitcher for a long time. Mostly he wasn't a great pitcher, not a near-miss Hall of Famer or anything, just a solid third starter for almost 20 seasons. He had a 3.51 ERA, pitching from 1925 through 1943, and for that period, that's a really strong ERA because the 20s and 30s were a really high offense period for the most part. The National League calmed down a bit faster than the American League did in the 30s, but still. He was from California, but he spent his whole career in New York with the Giants and Dodgers. One of my favorite pitching lines of all time was Ted Lyons' Sunday starter season of 1942. He was 41 years old. He made 20 starts, completed all 20, led the AL in ERA at 2.10, went 14-6, and had a .700 winning percentage. Fitzsimmons had one of those seasons too at 38 years old in 1940. Even though he was a knuckleballer, his arm tended to get sore. He had all kinds of physical problems. He made 18 starts. He completed 11, pitched 4 shutouts, saved a game, had a 2.81 ERA, and a 16-2 record which meant that he led the National League in winning percentage. And I know we sabermetric types are not supposed to put too much stock in one-loss record, and I don't, but still, 16-2 is pretty cool, and for the most part, a pitcher with a 16-2 record and a 2.81 ERA, he earned the record. So it's not like it's an unreasonable shorthand for quality here. As I said before the break, he was called fat, but he was more stumpy. He was 5'11", which even then for a pitcher was a little bit short. Pitchers tend to run tall, even at times when the average American, the average player even, is not that tall. That's not the part I want to talk about. This is not like Bob Fothergill's story where I have a kind of a moral that I want to teach. Well, there is a moral, but it's a kind of small one, a useful one, but a small one. I want to talk about 2 games that Freddie Fitzsimmons pitched, and the fact that he never won a World Series game despite several tries. On September 5th, 1931, the Dodgers were at the Giants. He was pitching for the Giants. Fitzsimmons had a 1-hit shutout going through 5. He had a 4-run lead, in part because he himself hit a 2-run home run. The Dodgers broke up the shutout in the 6th, but still, as we go to the 7th, Freddie was having a very good day. And then all at once, he wasn't. Giants pitcher Fred Hymek came up in that inning, 2 outs in fact, and I don't know what Freddie threw him exactly, but whatever it was, he wasn't a strikeout pitcher. Even then, he struck out about 2.5 per 9 innings, if that, and Hymek smashed a ball up the middle. It was a grounder, but somehow it took a high-velocity hop, and it nailed Freddie somewhere in the stomach, or in the ribs, or where the ribs meet the stomach. It's not clear from the different accounts. However, he went down. He was knocked to his knees. All the air is out of him. And from that moment on, he was unconscious. But Freddie had a great reputation as a fielder, and as testimony to that, he picked up the ball and completed the play, and then fell on his face. He had no memory of doing any of this. The trainer comes out, both teams surround the mound, smelling salts are administered. Freddie wakes up, they pat him on the head, they hand him a bat, and they say, "You're leading off the bottom of the 7th, go get him, Tiger." Now, was Freddie really awake at that point? Was he concussed? It seems unlikely that you would get a concussion from being hit in the stomach by a baseball, but the man was unconscious, the man did fall down, so something was going on there. So he goes up to the plate. Hymek is out of the game now. Back in that period of baseball, they would let pitchers hit and then replace them rather than pinch hitting for them. I mean, they did the other thing too, but managers don't seem to have always been as on top of things as they were. And of course, the gap between the average hitter and the good hitting pitcher was not as extreme as it might be now. So there's Freddie at the plate. And if we don't know if he was concussed before the at-bat, we can be pretty sure that he was after, because Giants reliever Cy Moore throws a high and tight fastball, and Fitzsimmons did have enough presence of mind to try to duck, but again, some days your luck has just turned. 1 minute you're pitching a shutout, the next there's a fastball crashing into the left side of your jaw. Fitzsimmons goes down in a heap, and for the second time, in the space of about 5 minutes, he is unconscious. And I defy you, in all the annals of baseball history, to find too many more players who have been knocked unconscious twice in the space of the same inning in the same game. Well, they get the smelling salts all again. They wake him up, but he has trouble standing. He needs help getting off the field, and he collapses again when he reaches the clubhouse. So no, this time his day is over. The reported diagnosis was a ruptured blood vessel in the head, which sounds like an aneurysm, but it was probably more like a bruise. He missed about 8 days, not the rest of his life. He missed only about 1 start, so I guess he was okay. A minor note on that game is that Giants manager John McGraw brought in Carl Hubble to finish it for Fitzsimmons. He picked up the save, which is a lot like bringing in Clayton Kershaw to finish it. A bigger point is that sometimes you duck fate, but it makes a second pass with the exact same roll of the great 20-sided die in the sky. Now we skip forward a bunch of years. Even though Fitzsimmons had that great year in 1940, even though he was a knuckleballer, by late in his career he was just a wreck. He really had a hard time getting and staying on the mound. In 1941, he didn't appear in a game until late May, and he only threw 82.2 innings all year. Still, they were good innings, so when the Dodgers won the NL pennant, manager Leo Durocher, there's Leo again, he keeps coming up, tabs him to start Game 3 against the Yankees at Brooklyn. Again, that sounds weird. A guy who only threw 82 innings all year, you're going to put him in a World Series? Well, the Dodgers didn't really have that much of a rotation that year. It was kind of a patchwork. It was a really veteran team. 4 of the 5 main starters were 35 or older. So starting a sore-armed 39-year-old was not unusual for them. Fitzsimmons' opponent for the Yankees was Marius Reissue, a great baseball name, not well remembered now, but he was a lefty who got in a few good years before a combination of arm problems and Hitler ended his career very quickly. In the game, both of them are brilliant for 7 innings. There are 4 future Hall of Famers in the Yankees lineup: Joe DiMaggio, Bill Dickey, Joe Gordon, Phil Rizzuto, 3 in the Dodgers lineup: Pee Wee Reese, Billy Herman, Joe Medwick, but the game was a scoreless tie heading to the top of the 7th. Fitzsimmons takes the mound, he gets 2 outs sandwiched around a walk, and that brought up his bête noire, opposing pitchers. This time there's no grounder. Reissue hits a hard liner up the middle, which catches Fitzsimmons right on the left knee. He hits it so hard, in fact, that the ball rebounded way up in the air, as high as a pop-up, some accounts say, and Pee Wee Reese got under it and caught it. People were rather confused about what had happened, at least those in the stands, but the umpires had the presence of mind to note that the ball had never touched the ground. It had just gone zap off the bat, rebounded off of Fitzsimmons, hung up in the air for, 10 or 15 minutes, and then Pee Wee Reese caught it for the out. Inning over. Also, Fitzsimmons' career over. Once again, he had to be helped off the field. You can see the pictures. On one side of him is Coach Chuck Dressen, and on the other side, another infinite inning friend, Cookie Lavagetto, and they took him to the hospital. He had suffered, incredibly enough, a bad bruise, I assume a very bad bruise, but no fracture. He said, "I guess I should have learned to duck long ago. When I first started pitching, they told me, all they can do is bruise you, but this is a bit more than a bruise, and maybe now I'm too old to play any other way." In fact, he was too old to play any other way. He was too old to play, especially on a bad knee. It never did respond, and one wonders if the diagnostics available at the time, X-rays and probing things with fingers, missed a more subtle injury that our better machines would have picked up today. He tried to come back, but between his sore arm and his knee, it was over. Midway through the 1943 season, he retired to become manager of the Philadelphia Phillies. He won 217 Major League games, but was 0 for 4 in World Series attempts. And within that 0 for 4 was a game he pitched decently against the Senators, but the Senators shut out the Giants, and this game in which the opposing pitcher tried to kill him. I mentioned before that Freddie was supposed to be a very good fielder, despite his girth. He had a wind-up that makes that sound even more unlikely because he completely turned his back to the batter. And yet, maybe because of that, there are more instances than I've told you about of batters pounding the ball off his person. Regarding this, he said, "That's what you get for being a good fielding pitcher. I've been hit everywhere, in the throat, on the wrist, and all over." And that strikes me as a strange statement because that's what you get for not being a very good fielding pitcher. Fitzsimmons, who's supposed to be shockingly agile, kind of like one of those hippos in Fantasia, just gets peppered with baseball. He's Charlie Brown out there being undressed by line drives. Like I said, there's no huge moral here. If there is one, it's that there is no incongruity in what Fitzsimmons said, that he was a good fielding pitcher, and somehow the universe in all its unfairness selected him to be barraged by more than his share of baseballs. And perhaps more than that, for some of us, at the turning points of our lives in our World Series games, in the midst of our shutouts and one-hitters and so forth, the universe paints a bullseye on us and uses us for target practice. And if we're lucky, really lucky after that, we get to go manage the Phillies, which is often even worse. This life of ours is perplexing and offers some very strange incentives, rewards, and punishments. We'll take our second and last.
You know, I accidentally chopped off the tail end of the episode when I was remastering the old stuff, to the extent that I remaster it, and we're running so far behind that I think I'm just going to freestyle this section. As As ever, should you wish to follow me, you can do so on social media at stephengoldman.bsky.social, and there's a Facebook group, Barnacle Like It Clings. Simply go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning, bang, you're there should you wish to support the show, and I very much hope you do. Please visit patreon.com/The Infinite Inning. Oh, and I left off, if you want to write us, by which I mean me, simply go to infiniteinning@gmail.com. Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of Dr. Rick Mooring and myself. And since I lopped off what he said at the end of this episode, I really don't know, so I asked him, and he wasn't prepared to tell me anything new. He simply said, make something up. Don't just leave it like I didn't say anything. Well, that's what he said. It's the best I can do. Well, that's all for me for this reissue episode, however lame it is. As I've said a couple of times already, I will be back in just a brief 24 hours or so from now with a new episode, number 351 in the series, and maybe we'll have a new World Series champion to talk about. And it's not that I'm rooting for one side or the other, I'm rooting for 7 games, so I kinda hope not.